Hey 670. So today's lesson is going to be on causes of the Civil War, and it's going to connect a lot of what we started to learn in this unit about slavery to the Civil War. So let's begin. So the U.S. Civil War took place during the dates. It started on April 12th, 1861, and it lasted up until June 2nd, 1865. And it was the costliest war fought on U.S. soil, meaning it that war costed the most money out of any other war that was ever fought on U.S. soil. And over 650,000 U.S. citizens were killed, and the South was devastated. So this war basically took place between the southern states and the north. California also was on the north side, and it took place between the Confederate states, which were in dark gray over here, and the Union states, which is all these states in the north here, and California. And I'm gonna get into what exactly the Confederate states are. And as you can see here, we have two different flags. One, we have the American flag here, and this right here is known as the Confederate flag, which represented these states over here at the time. So I'm going to get into what exactly led up to this war. That's what this lesson is going to be on. So let's continue. So what divided the nation? So there were several causes of the Civil War, but the greatest factor was slavery. That's ultimately what this war was based on: disagreements over slavery. So states' rights has been an issue since the Articles of Confederation was formed. This goes all the way back to Unit 2, which was when we talked about the Articles of Confederation. And this is when, back when we studied how the US first gained their independence from Britain, and the Articles of Confederation was our country's first constitution that was written back in 1781. But as we learned before, this constitution gave the states too much power, and it did not give the federal government enough power. So the federal or the national government would make decisions about alliances, treaties, the military, and other national issues, but they could not interfere with states' affairs. So it gave the states a lot more power. And that was a big problem for the national government. All right, once colonies became states, some acted in their own best interests, and sometimes those individual states' decisions and laws weren't best for the whole country, and the federal government was weak under the Articles of Confederation. So the founding fathers, they could not agree on the amount of federal government control, and many southern states wanted to retain their independence and have greater states' rights. And on the other hand, many northern states wanted fewer states' rights and a stronger federal government. So back here, there was disagreement between the North and the South. The northern states wanted the federal government to have more power, while the southern states wanted to retain their independence and have greater states' rights. And we're going to see why the southern states wanted to have their own independence and have more power. So the U.S. Constitution is born, and this is the same Constitution that we have to this day. So after 4 months, the articles could not be rewritten, and instead they rewrote the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in 1787, as we studied before. And this created a stronger federal government. So southern states felt that the Constitution would not allow states to act independently, and it ignored states' rights. So the southern states did not like the U.S. Constitution. And here we have the phrase nullification please. So what nullification is that it allows states to rule that a federal decision is unconstitutional and that states don't have to follow it. So if the federal government makes a rule or a law, nullification allows the states to not have to follow that law if it is unconstitutional. All right? The states can rule that law unconstitutional. So Southern delegates wanted nullification to protect their own states' rights. But the federal government said, nope, not happening. So the Southern states were angry. They felt that the federal government was taking away their states' rights. So now we're going to get into slavery and economy. So slavery was really what drove the Southern economy, right? The Southern economy was driven by agriculture, so they relied heavily on slavery for labor in the fields, such as cotton fields, right? Cotton was a huge cash crop, and a lot of cotton fields were planted in the South. So there was a big need for slavery in the South, right? So the Southern states wanted slavery to continue because they relied heavily on slave labor. Now, the Northern economy was not driven by slavery. They did not need slaves. They were driven by industry or machines, right? So they did not need slaves. So many Northerners became increasingly against slavery. So abolitionists, those are people who are against slavery. They work towards ending slavery, while the South worked towards holding on to it. So that was beginning to cause a major divide within the country. That disagreement and opposing views on slavery between the North and the South. So here are some famous abolitionists. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this slide, but these are some well-known people in history who fought against slavery in their own special ways. So Frederick Douglass, you're actually going to read a whole book about him in 7th grade. Next year, 670, whoever is with me, we are going to be reading this book in ELA about the life of Frederick Douglass. He was someone who escaped slavery, and he shared his experience through powerful speeches. Harriet Beecher Stowe is another one. She wrote anti-slavery novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was published in 1851. And Harriet Tubman is another famous abolitionist who helped slaves to escape freedom by the Underground Railroad. So there was a fugitive slave law which was passed in 1850, and many Northerners disagreed with the law. All right, so runaway slaves, stupid things in the way. Sorry, guys. Runaway slaves would be caught in the North and returned to the South. So this law prohibited or didn't allow slaves to run away. If they were caught in the North, they would be returned to the South. Westward expansion. So new lands were being added to the U.S. during the 1800s. We learned this towards the end of our last unit. So when each territory gained statehood, meaning when each territory officially became a state in this country, would it be a free state or would it be a slave state? So neither the North nor the South wanted political power to shift. The South wanted all of the states in the South to be slave states, while the North wanted all the states in the North to be free states. So each new state became a battleground, and the U.S. government tried to maintain a balance. How did they do this? Through the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So Missouri would be admitted as a slave state, and Maine would be admitted as a free state. So I'm going to show you what this looks like on the map. Slavery would not be permitted in the lands acquired during the Louisiana Purchase north of latitude 3630. So lands acquired north of this line, slavery would not be allowed there. They were free states. So that is that line that we were talking about. So states above this line, north of this line, would be free states, and states south of this line would not be free states. It would be slave states, right? And but no one was really happy with this, right? The North was upset that slavery would still be permitted in new states in the South, while the South was upset that Congress could make laws prohibiting slavery, right? There would be more free states north, right? So as you can see, Missouri is right here and Maine is right here, right? And Maine, as you can see right here, it would be admitted as a free state, and Missouri would be admitted as a slave state. So Missouri is right here, Maine is right here. Right? Free states up here, slave states down here. So in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act was passed. So what this act says is that now popular sovereignty or voting by the citizens would determine if a new state would be a free or a slave state. So the government decided that we're going to leave it up to the people to vote in all those new states, whether or not that state would be a free or a slave state. But hold on. Remember that line that we were talking about back in this previous slide? Remember it said that if you were above this line, you would be a free state? But what about new states, right? Kansas and Nebraska were both north of latitude 3630, right? They were both above that line. So shouldn't they both be free states according to that Missouri Compromise of 1820? Well, this act overturned that compromise. So what would happen? Anti and pro-slavery groups rushed to the Kansas border to vote. So people from out of state, they rushed to that state to vote because you have to be in that state to vote for a law for that state, right? So people who were for slavery and against slavery, people from both groups rushed to the Kansas border to vote. And what happened as a result? Violence, as you would expect, right? Because when you have people with opposing views all in one place, and this is not a sensitive issue here either, violence would break out, right? And this event would be known as Bleeding Kansas. So this was one step that would, step of the way that would eventually lead to war, all right? As we've learned in past units, usually when we have these little incidences of violence breaking out, a lot of times eventually it leads to a bigger war. So this was one of the events that would lead to the Civil War. Scott versus Stanford. So this is a very important event in history. So Dred Scott was a slave who lived in various free states before returning to Missouri, which is a slave state. He was sued for his freedom. He argued that living in a free state entitled him to freedom. But that was actually not the case. Just because you lived in a free state didn't mean that you were automatically a free person. So, in 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled an enslaved person was property and did not have any rights. So basically, if you were a slave, you were treated as property, not a human being. You were owned. So a free African American was not a U.S. citizen and could not sue. So even if you were not a slave, if you were an African American, you could not get U.S. citizenship, and therefore you could not sue. An enslaved person can't become free by traveling to a free state or territory. So if you are a slave, you can't get freedom if you travel to a free state. And Congress can't prohibit slavery from expanding west. So the government could not stop slavery from expanding to the west. So since slaves were property, slave owners had the right to take their slaves into free states and territories. Since slaves were property, they could not become free just by being in a free state or territory. So here we are going to talk about the raid on Harper's Ferry, another important event in history. And we're going to see how this all eventually leads to the Civil War that we're going to talk about. So John Brown was an abolitionist, someone who fights against slavery, who fought in Bleeding Kansas. Remember that event that we were just talking about a couple slides ago, where violence broke out in Kansas? So he moved east in 1857, and he planned a rebellion. In October 1857, he led a raid on a federal army in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. So an armory is a place where weapons are stored. So he led a raid there to steal those weapons. He wanted to seize those weapons and give them to slaves. And he wanted armed slave uprising. So in other words, he wanted to give all the slaves all those weapons so that they could lead an uprising, meaning a rebellion, and fight back. But his raid failed. Brown was captured and executed, killed for treason. This further inflamed the tensions and made those tensions between the North and the South even worse. So the North viewed him as a martyr, obviously something positive, as a leader, someone who is doing honorable work. So what did the South begin to do as a result? They began militarizing for future raids, right? They said, "Oh, that's what they're gonna do. They're gonna try to raid armies, so we're gonna militarize ourselves." Welcome Republicans. So the Republican is a party that still exists today. I'm sure you're all aware that we have Democrats and Republican, the biggest two political parties. And this political party was formed in the 1850s. And at the time, they opposed slavery. So during the 1860 election, Abraham Lincoln became the presidential candidate for the Republicans. Many Southerners believed he was against slavery and the South. So nobody in the South wanted to vote for him. They didn't even have his name on the ballot in many Southern states, but despite that, he still won the election. And Southern states were very upset, obviously, right? So South Carolina decided to secede on December 20th, 1860. And what we mean by secede is simply leave the country. Soon, Mississippi, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida, all those states seceded. And instead of being part of the United States of America, they formed their own country called the Confederate States of America. And remember the Confederate flag that I showed you on slide 1 or slide 2? That flag basically represented these states. And this would pretty much lead, this is where the Civil War begins. All right? So, once again, we saw this. The Union states are all the states in blue, these northern states plus California, and all the Confederate states are those southern states, that we just saw on the previous slide: Florida, South Carolina, all the states that we mentioned, right? So here we have Fort Sumter, and this is a Union-controlled fort in Confederate territory. It was located off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina. Lincoln sent supplies to the fort, and Confederate forces blocked the supplies. So obviously, Lincoln was not in support of the Confederate States. And Confederate forces opened fire on April 12th, 1861. And this is just one battle, one of many other battles that would take place during the Civil War. And we're going to go into more details on those battles in future lessons. And this would pretty much begin the Civil War. All right, so that is all for this lesson. I'm going to make another quick video where I'm just going to quickly review how to complete the assessments for this lesson. But this video should have given you all the background information you need for this topic. All right, and I hope you all enjoyed it.